All right, so we're going to pick up where we left off. And we're going to now, instead of just logging the information, we're going to actually build up a JavaScript object and send that JavaScript object to the server. I think this is all good. So let's get rid of the console.log. And instead, let's create a JavaScript object called entry. It'll be like our journal entry. And we're going to use like the JavaScript object literal syntax here with the curly brackets and define each of our properties. And I'm going to show you some shortcuts too. So I'm going to say date, and then I'm going to say competency, employability competency, and then content. So I've defined a JavaScript object, or I created a JavaScript object, assigned it to the variable entry. It has 3 properties. What do you notice about this syntax that's different than what we've seen before? I'm showing you like a new syntax feature we've never seen. Yeah. Yeah, right. Normally this would be date colon the variable up above, and content colon and the variable up above, right? This is a JavaScript shortcut when we're creating objects with properties. If the name of the property is the same as the name of the variable in this code, you don't need to specify it twice. So date is defined up above here. So normally we do stuff like this, right? But you'll notice our linter is like, hey, there's what's called property shorthand. If, again, the name of the variable is the same as the name of the property, we can leave it out, and that's implied. So this makes our code a little bit more concise, and it's basically like create a property called date with a value of the current date variable. Create a property called content in the same way. I could have done the same thing with competency here if I just changed the name of this variable, but I wanted you all to be able to compare and contrast the shortcut from the normal way we define properties. So you'll see this a lot in JavaScript code, this property shorthand. So I wanted to introduce that today as well. All right, let's send the data to the server. So I'm going to create a variable called response, which will receive the response from the server. And fetch is an asynchronous call, so I have to say await. I want to wait for the fetch command to finish. So we're going to call fetch. The first argument is the path or the endpoint. It's going to be create entry. The second argument is going to be a JavaScript object with a few important properties. The first is method, and that is what is the HTTP command we're sending to the server. We're sending post. Then we specify the headers of the HTTP command. These may be familiar from when we first introduced HTTP commands and we saw the different properties of them. In our header, the header is itself like a JavaScript object. And the property we're going to define is called content type. We are sending it JSON. So we need to be explicit here that we're sending the server, the body of this command is in JSON. It's not in like HTML. It's not a string. It's not some other content type. It's JSON. And then we specify the body. And here's a really cool JavaScript function. We saw last week how easy it was to take a JSON file and suck it into our code as a JavaScript object. It's just as easy by calling the stringify function on the JSON class to pass a JavaScript object referenced by entry and stringify it. Stringify it means take this JavaScript object and turn it into a JSON string and make that, and then we're assigning that to the body property of our command. You may notice that we have the squiggly red underline saying we have an error here on the await. It says we cannot use the keyword await outside of an async function. That is true. So we need to go up here to our function, our arrow function. This is all inside of our add event listener here. And we need to specify that this arrow function is asynchronous. So we add the async word before the parentheses in the arrow is how we specify that this arrow function is an asynchronous function. Now this went away. All right, finally, let's clean this up a little bit. We only want to redirect to the home page if it was successful. So let's say if response dot OK is a Boolean property of a response to an HTTP command. It just means it's successful. There's other properties here. There's status. So if we care like exactly what code we get back from the server, we can check status. If we just want to know it was successful, which could be a variety of statuses, we can just check OK, which is a lot easier than if status equals 200 or status equals 201 or this is a lot better. All right, so if it's okay, we'll redirect. Else, let's do a console.error. So this will show up flagged as an error in the console. Error creating entry. Yes.
Could we use like the question mark here?
Yeah, we could do that. For sure. For sure. So, yeah, it would absolutely work and be completely valid. This is where things kind of like how things tend to be used. So I would say the ternary operator, the question mark and colon, is more often used to assign a value to a variable. So I would say like this type of usage is more common than turning this into one. It doesn't mean it's wrong and it would totally work. It's just what I don't know, maybe an unwritten convention, maybe. You will write a lot of code like we just wrote. So this is really common where you'll define a function for an event listener. You'll have to do methods like query selector all to get references to a bunch of HTML elements and their values. You'll build it into a JavaScript object. You'll call the fetch function to some endpoint with a post, say it's JSON, and pass along that object to the server. This is what makes web apps work fundamentally, right? We're sending the data back to the server. Now we have to write the server side of it. So let's go to inside of server, routes, router.js. Here's where we're handling all of our endpoints, our paths. Here's the default path here. Here is the create entry path, but for the get command. So we're going to add another path for the post command. So route.post is how we specify this. It's still the create entry endpoint. And that's fairly typical that we would have a get with our router. We'd handle get commands for a endpoint and we'd handle post commands. So think of the get command as they like go to the page and we display them like the form where they're going to be completing information. The post is like, okay, they filled out the form, they're submitting it, and then they're moving on somewhere else. So this is pretty typical. We're still going to have two parameters, rec and response, just like before. Here is how we get the data out of the HTTP post command, out of the request, and into a JavaScript object. It's really pretty easy. we can just say const entry equals rec.body. So even though on the client side, we assigned the body property a string, which was the stringified JSON, which was the JSON of the stringified object, when we get to the server side, that property has been transformed already into a JavaScript object. So we just get to assign it to a variable and use it like any other JavaScript object, which is great. We do need to be a little bit careful with types going from JSON to JavaScript and back and forth, but that's not going to show up too much in this app. I just mention it for like future reference. We're going to do the database part in a moment. So for now, let's just log it. I'm just going to say log entry plus entry. And then we need to respond to the client and specify the status of 201, which means we accept their data. And then we call end to like end this HTTP command. So we're kind of chaining these functions here, like res.status.end is pretty typical. We could do res.status, which returns that, and then we could call end on that, but it's easy to do it all in one line of code. All right, let's give this a shot. So I'm going to go to the run and debug menu. You can choose the node server. I'm going to run that. I'm going to switch to the node client. I'm going to run that. Move that up here. Create entry. Pick a day. Journal entry. Hit submit. Go back to VS Code. Bring up my window here. Okay, so entry undefined doesn't work. Feel better with make a little change there. This is really frustrating. So students and I run into this a lot where we think we wrote all the right code and there's like one little thing that we forget to specify. And so the JSON stuff isn't working. And so in this case, and again, we don't get any error messages. We just get that this rec.body just doesn't work. And the reason is we have to tell our Express app that we are going to be using JSON in HTTP request bodies. By default, that is not turned on. I don't know why, because everyone uses it. So we're going to have to go inside of server.js. And after we make our app here, here's our Express app. We're going to add some more middleware. So add middleware to handle JSON in HTTP request bodies used with post commands. Now, the good news is, like, once we type this line of code here, app.use, express.json, we're good, we're done. We will never have to worry about this again for this app, which means you'll never have to worry about it as you work on the summative part of this lab, the summative lab coming up in a couple of days. But when you're working on your own web application and your post commands aren't working and none of the data is getting to your server, go back and check that you actually explicitly turned on that we're using JSON in HTTP request bodies. So this has caused me lots of frustration over the years. Now, if I switch back to Chrome and create a new entry, I can see like a whole object gets logged here. If I want to see what it actually is, I'd have to set like a breakpoint in router.js, which I could totally do. I can set a breakpoint on line 25. I can switch back to Chrome. I can create the entry again. Click, click, click. Hit my breakpoint. I can open up the entry and I can see all the values. Here's the content, here's the date. Competency is null. Anyone else seeing that? Yeah? All right. We must have made a mistake. Let's take a look. So somehow I would guess we are not getting the value of like our check buttons in some way. So I'm going to set a breakpoint here on the client side. Again, let's keep this running. Switch back to Chrome, create an entry, date, oops, click a button, submit. All right, so we're going to do query selector all input.competency checked. So I'm going to step over that and see EC buttons is empty. So the competency gets assigned to null. Well, that's not great. Anyone know what we did wrong? Sometimes I have bugs for opportunities for us to discuss. This is not one of those things. Let's look at the EJS file. So this is actually really good. Actually, we ran into this. This is part of what makes this so challenging is there's so many different files involved. And you have to keep peeling back the layers of the onion until we get to where the root cause is. So I started in router.js and I looked at the entry that came to the server and one of the properties was null. So then I'm like, okay, let's go to the client code that sends that data to the server and see if it's getting the data. And it's not. So something is probably wrong in terms of how we set up our class and things to actually see all of this. So that's all going to be done in our EJS file. So if I look at createentry.ejs, I can see where we're creating the radio buttons. And what I notice here is that the radio button is of class competencies, plural. But I think in createentry.js, I'm looking for competency, singular. This is the stuff that drives me insane. These are the days I question my choice of career. All right, so let's go back here. Let's change the class to competency, singular. I'm going to change the name too. I forget where this shows up, but I'm afraid we're going to like run into this bug again later when we use the name. All right, so that's promising, I think. So I'm going to continue debugging. At least we don't have to like stop and start programs and compile. We've got that going for us. So create entry, choose the date, press the competency, submit, step over here, buttons. Hey, now there's actually an element in here. Great. If I step over this with the value, this looks much more promising. So my entry has a competency, a content, and a date. Good, we fixed it, I think. So now on the server side, we're about to log the entry. But if I look at the entry, I can see the content, the date, and the competency is all filled in. So this is good. We're up and running. We did a great job.